Hello social media navigators!
Hey, listen!
Yes, those guys and you too navigating through the social media platforms. Thank you so much for checking this video out. Welcome to our channel if this is your very first time. And welcome to another ranking videos on my top 5 Metroid games. On today's top 5 Metroid games, my ranking will be solely based on my experience from playing these games and nothing else. So with that in mind, let's get started. My first game at the bottom of the list is Metroid 2 Return of Samus. I have this game at the bottom of the list not because it's a bad game, but because of the bewilderment I had upon playing these for the very first time and the exact same reason why I believe it doesn't get as much love as it deserves, and somewhat I do understand along the same lines as well. As a kid, I wasn't sure what to expect out of this game, but it sure felt kind of primitive in comparison to the very first Metroid. I felt as if it wasn't as graphically attractive or appealing as other Game Boys at the time. Understandably though, having to be a handheld game for the original Game Boy, I think it was a pretty decent Game Boy game for what it was intended to convey, something that grew on me later on. This game seems to have a much slower pace than other Metroid games. The button input seemed like it had a minor delay even when played through the original Game Boy. I'm specifically referring to the space jump or screw attack. These moves require such precision on the button input for you to keep afloat. Otherwise, you will lose your space jump and fall all the way down to where you originally started. But it's just a matter of getting used to it. It is not as bad as I may make it sound to be. Having to be the first handheld of its series, thumbs up for that because it was a pretty good game. It is still, and nowadays I think it's really underrated. In my number 4 spot, I have the original Metroid for the Nintendo. The one who started it all. If it hadn't been for this game, for this first installment, and the impact it did on the video game industry as far as opening a whole new genre, we probably wouldn't have many of the games we now have in present days. Heck, if it hadn't been for Metroid in combination with the Castlevania series, we wouldn't have the term that we all gamers very well know nowadays, the Metroidvania style kind of game, which is a concept that has been very well adopted by many current generation games. This was one of the first games I had a love-hate relationship with because even for as much as I played this as a kid, it sure pissed me off because there was no way for me to figure out how to go past certain areas. I reiterate, as a kid's experience. This was one of the first games I owned as a kid where I truly felt empowered just by playing it because it was also one of the first ones where I had to explore the hell out of the maps to discover power-ups, upgrades and other discoverable goodies. I couldn't have left this one out of the list because I am not sure if I had had the same incitement to play the preceding Metroid games had it not been for this classic. Oh boy, I think this is the ranking where I'm gonna get stoned and pitchforked to death.
Let's get it!
Virtually, that is, I hope so. Because this game, it's kind of controversial as far as being one of the black sheep from the series. But not for me. And that is Metroid Other M.
What's wrong with you? What is wrong with you?
Fudge! On my 3rd place, pretty high up on my top 5 in comparison to other games that I didn't place in my ranking.
You serious?
I'll explain and elaborate more about the games that I left out, but once I get to that in a few minutes. So I placed this game very high up on my list, or kind of in between, because aside from the story, I truly believe this is a really good game. A really great looking game. I'm sorry to say, I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for these, but in my personal opinion, graphically, it looks better than the Metroid Prime series. There, I said it. Sorry about that.
but not sorry.
I will explain in a bit later why I believe and stand by this statement even to this date. When I first saw Metroid Other M opening scene, oh my freaking god, did I shit my pants watching Super Metroid's last scene with the new 3-dimensional graphics. I loved it right away. This is everything I loved from this game. It has a great, fantastic action sequences. It has the movie mode, modernized story elements, pretty good, gorgeous, polished graphics, the scenes, the character designs, the atmosphere, the world overall. And oh my, the beam effects, they all look just superb. They sure made me feel you were in total control of the game. The plasma beam, the wave beam, just amazing. The boss battles were all fun. Heck, even attacking regular enemies felt so good, because with some of them you were able to jump on them and blast them right on their head. And that's one more thing that added a special kick to the gameplay. The battle mechanics. Just loved this game. Again, if we take the story out for just a minute and see everything else this game had going on for itself, I believe, once again, this is a great game. I know many of you hated the story, and I will not argue with that. I can't disagree with that. Trust me, I hated this asshole, Adam Malkovich.
Looks like I'm gonna need to ask for your cooperation on this mission, but I'm also gonna have to ask that you follow my commands. You don't move unless I say so, and you don't fire until I say so.
Fuck is with this guy? Who is he?
If they hadn't written the story in the way where Adam restricts you from using your full weaponry, I think this could have been an almost perfect game. Trust me, there's nothing I hate more than a game or a story that restricts you from acquiring whatever it is you want to get, especially on these kind of open exploration games. They're called open exploration games for a reason, right? I know there are a few exceptions in some games where you need to get certain items or complete certain side quests in order for you to upgrade whatever it is you need to upgrade. But the moment you limit myself by the story itself, that's like giving me a middle finger. Like, no, you cannot do that. No, open exploration. No. It's not that type of open exploration, Jimmy. No. Oh, and this is not the only Nintendo game guilty of this, of restricting you on such game mechanics that restricts you from doing something. I can sure name a couple of other Nintendo franchises that do the exact same thing that restricts you from doing something or talking to a character just because you need to get that item or talk to that NPC at a specific time of the day. And not to mention this one game that I'm not gonna mention because I'm probably gonna get literally stoned to death, goes with your real life time, such as a daytime or nighttime quests. If it's just a side quest, then I don't have as much of a problem as if it is part of the main objective quest where you are restricted to get something at a specific time of the day or night. Again, Metroid Other M, not the best story, probably the worst, or if we can even call it a story, right? But everything else, in my opinion, it's freaking great. And my number 2 spot is another handheld game. Metroid Fusion, or aka Metroid 4. I really can't think of many cons or any cons for this game other than it didn't really have any new game mechanics, elements, or abilities that stood out. But it sure felt like it was Metroid 2 Return of Samus on steroids. In my personal opinion, one of the best 2D looking Metroid games. This game has great controls, sound effects, special effects, and visuals. All just the best of what we could have gotten at the time it came out. As a matter of fact, this game will turn 20 next year on 2022, and it still holds strong to this date. Graphically, it hasn't aged. The level and enemy designs were almost flawless and the storyline was great. It was freaking creepy, scary, and so captivating as these Metroid games should be. This game sure exceeded my expectations, even though it was only the 4th installment in the series, but only the 2nd in the handheld collection. Before I move on to my first place ranked Metroid game, I sure want to give credit to these games as honorable mentions, because they're not bad games, but I'll explain why I didn't place them on my top 5. First is Metroid Zero Mission and Metroid Samus Returns. The only reason why I didn't place these on my top 5 because they are remakes of the original Metroid and Metroid 2, respectively. They sure are great remakes as each one of them has additional special features and game mechanics to play with. But if it hadn't been for these original installments, these games probably would have never seen the light of day. I know you're gonna hate me for this if you are not already hating my guts to death, because these games are to be considered the best in the series. Unfortunately, not for me, but I'll explain in a minute. These are the Metroid Prime series. Having to come from the 2D Metroid games, it sure threw me off to see a Metroid game in the first-person perspective. I'm not gonna get technical of what the proper classification of these games are, whether it's a first-person shooter, first-person adventure, first-person my ass, first-person I don't give two shits. I'm just gonna stick with the general term of first-person perspective. Other than having the arm cannon on the screen in the story itself, this could have easily passed on as any other first-person perspective shooter or adventure game.
First person perspective.
For me, it felt like I was playing another Halo or 007 game. I know, they're nowhere to be comparable, but I just didn't buy into the idea of playing a Metroid game from a first-person perspective. I prefer my Metroid games to be from a third-person perspective so I can at least appreciate Samus's designs or armor or suit designs. This point may sound a little bit contradictory as me placing Other M on my number 3 spot has some segments that are played through a first-person perspective, but that was not a feature that was forced into the game. It was not something that you were forced to implement in your gameplay. In the contrary, having to switch in between a third and first-person perspective was something I really liked and appreciated because you were not locked into playing the game from just one perspective. Another minor little issue I have with the Prime series is that having to be the first full-on 3D game, they did not look as good as they could have. And I'm telling you, because there were some areas that it was really hard to figure out how to get to from point A to point B, just because some of the wall textures or floors, they were really fussy, and it sure made it a bit more complicated than it needed to be for you to progress in the game. So the first time I played these games on the GameCube, I got really lost and pretty much just gave up. I reiterate, this is all from the experience of not consulting or owning a guide or looking up at a walkthrough online. I'm not saying these are bad games. I think for as much as they could have done at the time, not being HD games, they look alright. But if you are familiar with these Prime series, the Metroid Prime series consists of having or navigate yourself through a lot of dark areas where only at the point where you got an upgraded visor, that was the only way that you could facilitate and make advancement on your progress. But still, it was very annoying having to switch in between visors, and oh my god, how I hated the thermal visor in Metroid Prime 1. It wasn't till just recently, last year, where I devoted myself and pushed myself to finish at least Metroid Prime 1 for the very first time, but played through the Metroid Prime Trilogy, which enhances the graphics just a tiny bit to appreciate how good the visuals for the Prime series could have been. One issue I had with the Metroid Prime is that it didn't have the speed boost or the screw attack, which had been staples in the Metroid series. Of course, I was disappointed not to see these on the first Prime game. I know they brought these moves and upgrades on the subsequent Prime series games, but it just wasn't the same then. Speaking of not being the same, in this case, not being quite original, even though Metroid Prime 2 did bring the screw attack back into the series, there was one thing I felt as it was a recycled or copied idea from another personal favorite game franchise of mine, The Legend of Zelda. I'm specifically referring to the traveling between worlds or portals, dimensions, or whatever the case may be. First, I saw this concept on The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Past. And even though A Link to the Past did not make it to my top 5 Legend of Zelda games, I'm not too fond of recycled ideas in between games, especially when they have the same parent company, in this case Nintendo. There were some areas that you could only access through the dark or light portal, and if I recall it right, as a matter of fact, in order for you to get the screw attack on Prime 2, you had to get back and forth in between these portals, the dark and the light, meaning that this area was only accessible through the dark portal, but then there was another area over here that you had to jump back through the light portal, and then this other area over here back into the dark portal. And it wasn't a thing where, oh, this dark portal will automatically take you to this area. It wasn't like this. Or again, if I could be wrong, please correct me on the comment section below, but as far as I remember, when I went after the screw attack, that's how it was. Jumping from the dark area into the light, back into the dark, back into the light, and I don't know how many times I had to do that until I finally got the screw attack. But at that point, I was already turned off and
Screw this game, I said.
and I just lost interest because it was boring and a very tedious process. One last thing I remember having to be very annoyed on the Prime series is that only certain weapons could kill certain enemies. So having to switch back and forth between your arm cannons became such a tedious task, especially when you had 2 or 3 different enemies on screen that needed to be killed with 2 or 3 different types of cannons, as if it was sometimes when you had killed the little Metroids with the ice beam or the fire beam or what had you at one time. On the other Metroid games, once you got an upgraded weapon, arm cannon, whether that was the plasma or the wave beam, that's all you needed. Your upgraded arm cannon was able to obliterate all enemies on screen, regardless of what the level of the enemy was. It was just stronger than the previous arm cannon you had without having to switch back and forth. I kind of understand this game mechanic on the Prime series because it sure added a level of challenge. And it's not the challenge I minded, it's just the annoyance of having to switch in between arm cannons. I actually have quite a few more issues with the Metroid Prime series, but this is not a Metroid Prime series review video, nor will I ever do one, so let's just move on. I guess at this point, my number 1 spot may come in as an obvious choice because aside from the spin-off games, there aren't very many other games that I can think of could take the number 1 spot. So here it is, Super Metroid. Hell yes! Everything I like about this game is pretty much a combination of the opinions I already shared with Metroid Other M and Metroid Fusion. But it's definitely my number 1 game, not only because of the opinions I already shared, but because this game gave us so much and introduced so many things that became staples in the Metroid series, such as the suit, the upgrades, the speed boost, the grapple, the super missile, the super bomb. Besides the Metroid Prime games, which are the highest rated among the Metroid series, Super Metroid is considered to be the best 2D Metroid game. And I couldn't agree anymore. In case you haven't seen my previous review or ranking videos, I must note and reiterate that these rankings are solely based on my experience from playing these games and nothing else. My rankings are not based on popularity amongst consumers, as you may have already noticed why I don't have any of the Prime series games in my rankings. I don't have much else to say about Super Metroid, or at least nothing I have already stated on my previous rankings, aside from this having to be the revolutionary game that opened up the Metroid universe to a whole new level. This story was so immersive, captivating, and engaging, something that not a lot of games of the time did. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound tautologous, but this game sounds and looks great. Great soundtrack, plays great, and it has one of the best replay values any retro game from the time. And as a bonus, the first one with an endgame map. Fudge, seriously, Nintendo knocked it out of the park with Super Metroid. I can go on to talk about Super Metroid endlessly, but again, this isn't a review. So I know my rankings are awful, probably, compared to the general consumers who happen to have the Prime series amongst their top 5, if not their favorite Metroid game of all time. I'm sure many of you will disagree, and let me know on the comment section below. Now, if any of your favorite Metroid games did make it my list, let me know as well. I want to thank you so much for sticking around on this video. Thank you so much for checking this channel out. I hope you like it. If you ended up liking this video, whether you agree with the rankings or not, I invite you to check the rest of our content, because we have so much video game related content that I'm sure you're gonna enjoy a video or two. I want to thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until next time, you go ahead and take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones. Love, hugs to everyone, and remember to game on. Game on.